the future. To be charged with treason was no simple matter, of course. So they must all have looked at the tea leaves periodically and wondered what was in store for them. 5 years, just can't imagine what that was like, the uncertainty, the anxiety. Shortly after that, he was convicted of sabotage for planting a bomb in Johannesburg. And he was one of the first in the movement to go to prison. And my mom has got these incredible newspaper cuttings which tell the media side of the story. And, he denied, of course, the offense, and but he got 3 years, unexpectedly. The lawyers were sure we'd get off, the evidence was circumstantial, but he got 3 years, and he had to serve the full 3-year term, including solitary confinement. It was tough on the family, as Neil said, particularly when my mother, Mary, also got locked up, coincidentally, for 6 months. And there's a story there, 3 mothers going to prison for 6 months, with a picture of the kids sitting around wondering what was in store for them. We got ridiculed at school. Your parents are jailbirds, nothing worse. So it was tough. But he said he came out stronger from prison and more resilient. He persuaded us that although it was tough, he came out stronger. He didn't regret the experience. But both of them soon heard of plans to basically lock them both up again for much longer. They thought, the authority said he got off lightly with only 2 years for planting a bomb, right? They wanted to put him away to hurt this guy. Real troublemaker. And so, the prospect of spending a lifetime in prison was too much. Even though they'd made promises to comrades, they left the country. And under house arrest, he embarked on a very daring escape from Joburg to Botswana. He crossed the border with Botswana on foot from a remote area north of Limpopo near Lekalani on a journey across on foot of 60 or 70 miles through the bush. This is the actual map that he used. I looked at it just the other day. I hadn't seen it before. And it's incredibly basic. There are very few features. There's a river, there's a couple of ponds. He's got the distances in miles to let you know we're going to go that way or that way. He hadn't really plotted his route in advance. He did it at night so that the farmers in the area wouldn't identify him and put the dogs after him. And he crossed the Limpopo River from somewhere here, W, saying where he left the car, and he went to Botswana. And he made his way overland to Zambia, Tanzania, and Kenya. This is a Google map on the snapshot. Basically, this area hasn't changed much. It's pretty bleak. Big farms, isolated, remote, no development there in that area. So this is the newspaper coverage again. The media pretty on the ball in those days. Turok, you see, in vanishes. Turok believed, the Scarlet Pimpernel, believed to be on his way to Zambia. Turok suddenly appears in Nairobi. He sent his telegram to my mom. Still moving, everything fine, missing the route down there. Sure, when to start that? That was life in those days, It was no cell phone, brief to the point. And we joined them in Nairobi. We joined him in Nairobi. So the next phase, Tanzania. Tanzania was a fantastic experience for us. Nyerere was in charge. It was just after independence. Very exciting time. Visionary leadership from Nyerere. Clear kind of outlook, philosophy for the country of Ujamaa. Pulled together. In school we were involved. Dad was involved in, you'll recognize, Mwalimu. We learned Swahili. The ANC in exile, many people started settling in Dar. And he was very busy on land surveying, his trade, and doing a good job on resettling people out of flooded areas and so on. And it was a very, very inspiring experience for all of us, and we remember it deeply. But the schooling was a challenge. Only 2% of primary school leavers went to secondary school at that time, very few secondary schools. So my folks made the decision based on our futures that we're going to give up this great experience we were enjoying to go to the UK. And he lived in the UK, we lived in the UK for 20 years. The UK was fantastically, in those days, welcoming. There wasn't this xenophobia as there is at the moment. Brexit was a long way distant in the future. The UK was pretty hospitable to refugees like us. And they paid for our education, fantastic education. I had 8 years of free higher education. Neil the same, incredibly generous. Wouldn't happen today. Maybe it was a unique moment. Dad was involved in Sechaba. He edited Sechaba, the ANC journal. He got a job with the Open University. He was working on pioneering work in telephone technology and distance learning. Branched out into new fields characteristic of his life. He started doing a lot of teaching and writing about South Africa and development in Africa generally. He was active in the ANC, but he was also critical, and he published this critical commentary which got him into hot water with the powers that be in the ANC, because he was raising critical questions about where the movement was going. He visited the USSR. That's a picture of my grandmother, his mother, and a relative, and began to have questions about the Soviet system on the basis of visit and meeting people and hearing doubts about this authoritarian and centralized system. So he was open. Although he had ideologies and passions, he was also open. He set up an NGO, IFA, which is why we're here today. In the 70s, this was Bade Onomode, one of his pals. He created a network of these centers across Africa, and this was really, really quite an important initiative. So this was one of the tributes we had, one of the many tributes from Professor Batili in Senegal, with deep sorrow. 4 decades we interacted regularly. These initiatives offered platforms of reflection and action for African progressive intellectuals and activists. His tireless battle for good governance, sound leadership, Pan-African and international solidarity. Ben Turok will remember as a symbol of fidelity to his principles and values for the cause of the people of humanity. And it was just so nice. Put it on his Facebook page, and that just brings back memories. We would meet these African intellectuals, come to London, we would visit them in their centers, and it was very rich engagement. He traveled regularly to Africa, including he got bored of the Open University and a 3-year spell at the University of Zambia in the late 70s, where he wrote a couple of books, did quite a lot of research on Zambia, got actively involved in development issues in Zambia, which is another inspiring period, I think, in his life. Then, the next phase, of course, the return to South Africa. He was one of the first to come back. They turned up at the airport without any authorization. They entered the passports, with UK passports by that time, had red lights flashing. The passport control officials sent them to a deep, dark room somewhere in the depths of Tambo Airport and kept them there for 6 hours while they thought about what to do with these characters. Right? Security risk, security risk. Hadn't anticipated people coming back, even though the clerk had said ANC's unbanned and people can start coming back. Anyway, cut a long story short, met old friends, Walter Sisulu and others, delighted to be back, and moved IFA to Joburg. After the elections, this is a picture of the Gauteng provincial government. He was appointed NEC for the RDP program in the Gauteng province. You'll recognize Dr. Squale, Jesse Duarte, Sicelo, Sicheka, and I'm sure there are other faces that I don't recognize in that photo. So committed to doing things, getting on with action and development. When the RDP office was closed, he moved to Parliament to be with my mom, and he spent 20 years as an MP. Battery's running out.
3 years trying to be a diligent constituency MP. He was active in the finance committee, the trade industry committee, the active in the committees, and later chaired the Eastern Thuli will say something about that. He kept up his writing in a string of provocative books. The provocative titles, Welcome to Trickle Down, Nothing But the Truth. He was in the system, but he was also able to stand aside from the system. And he put it and criticized it and use that difficult space of being in us, but also challenging to us that Neil mentioned earlier. And it's difficult. We all know how difficult that is to retain your credibility, but also to be independent. He started New Agenda. This is just another of the critical titles, Beyond the Miracle, let's wake up and smell the coffee. We've got big challenges here, guys. Started New Agenda, important journal to stimulate debate. Dead keen to stimulate debate about where we're going. We can't take things for granted. We've got to go beyond ideology and rhetoric, and we have to get real. There are copies of New Agenda. Please help yourself available today. He was passionate about political education, and that title on the right is part of a series of books he published to try and increase awareness among MPs, amongst ANC cadres. He was adamant that we had to keep the struggle for ideas going in order for people to not get sloppy and get diverted by other concerns. Okay, so there are 3 key concerns he had. Overriding concerns that besides everything else, the economy was his #1 passion. We had to make sure the economy was more productive and move away from a narrow mineral energy kind of complex and a financialized extractive economy to a more broad-based economy. He had talked about the potential of South Africa, the incredible natural resources we have, the infrastructure, the human capital, the know-how we have, and the possibilities. Inequality was his second big passion, of course. He was offended, frankly, by South Africa's conspicuous inequality and the exclusion of the mass of the population. He said that's not sustainable politically or in any other way. And he was passionate about progressive politics and governance, of course. Not populist politics, not captured, not elitist. It was vital to deepen democracy. And these were connected. I mean, unlike many people, he tried to make the connections between these things. We've got to understand how one thing leads to another. This is a system. It's a systemic inequality we have. It's not going to be tackled by palliative measures. It requires structural changes. One of the recent books was Changing the Color of Capital, which I thought was a really nice title. Not cosmetic transformation. Not an elitist process, a deep-seated process of transformation. He was engaged with a whole series of wider initiatives. And one of the things he was most proud of was Neil's initiative to create the African Institute for Mathematical Sciences, which is doing incredibly well. Neil would love to give you a lecture on it, but it's doing really well. It's got centers across the continent, much like Dad's idea of having this network, and it's building capacity. It's trying to ensure that the next Einstein comes from Africa. It's a very bold, wonderful, fabulous initiative, and Dad was ever so proud of it and of Neil's efforts to make this a success. Lots of students and staff are here today, so really welcome you all. He was also very much a family man, and I haven't dwelt on this side of his personality, but he loved the family. He could switch off like that. He could entertain, crack jokes. He could hold the conversation. He could dominate. And he was a wonderful family man. That's in Father Christmas on the right. So what stands out for this? What stands out for me? There are 4 personal attributes I want to leave you with. The first is courage. He stood up for what he believed in, and he thinks we should all stand up for what you believe in. Whether it's planting a bomb or talking about sensitive and controversial subjects. This is a seminar he gave in 2018 in the University of Western Cape. I was just looking at the title of it. Deconstructing Decolonization, African Perspectives, Historical Insights and Lessons for the Future. I mean, if you've ever heard of a more complex, tricky, sensitive subject, and he launched into it, he was nervous about it. He did it, right? He was bold and he was courageous. He was also outspoken in the media, of course, and this is this finger thing. He wasn't scared of rocking the boat. I mean, I got into trouble in Durban. Neil mentioned the City Planning Commission. I got into big trouble. The mayor refused to meet me, right, because of him. I heard that from the officials. They said, "No father." Right? It was tricky. It was tricky. I once suggested he turned down. No way. No way. He stood up for what he believed in. He was outspoken. He wasn't scared of rocking the boat or even turning it upside down, if necessary. And even if he didn't have all the answers, he conceded that he didn't know the solutions to many of our complex challenges. But he said, we've got to raise these issues. We've got to get people thinking and talking about them. Just look at this next picture. You'll recognize it. Just look at the body language. But notice he's pointing with his little finger, not with his forefinger. Maybe that makes it a bit better. So his second attribute was his initiative. He didn't just want to talk. You've got to do something to make the world a better place. He was a lifelong activist on all sorts of things. He just got out there and did something. If there was something wrong, he just did it. Whether his traffic lights malfunctioning, there was a whole series of things. He just got in such inner confidence. I wish I had a bit more of it myself. Tremendous confidence to challenge authority, to try and make change. He was energetic, resourceful. He could be exhausting for the people around him. Speak to my mom, Mary. This dynamo, right? To live alongside him for 67 years. We saw him once or twice a week. Every day, 24/7. Woo! And IFA was often the vehicle. So IFA was trying to build a cohort actually of student activists and leaders. Really impressive initiative. Really important initiative that IFA was working on. Thirdly, inspiring commitment to social values, ethical principles and integrity. He encouraged others to rally behind him and join or support his cause. He was a bit like a Pied Piper, right, who inspired other people to follow him. But by realistic hopes, not by false promises and pipe dreams. He offered people a real prospect of change. And fourthly, good instincts. His ability to assess a situation and make a considered decision about what action was required. He had good and sound insight, good intuition, good judgment. He took a stand on the basis of common sense. I love to talk to him and get advice about the issues I faced, issues we faced. He would reason things through with you, and widely respected by people for his wisdom and his humility. He'd listen and he'd give you his view. That's a pretty powerful combination, those 4 attributes in once. He would really attribute this wonderful tribute, really appreciated this wonderful tribute from President Ramaphosa. I just want to mention one thing where he recognizes his role in the Constitution. I can't read it properly from here, but he said, I really appreciate the contribution made to the Constitution, major input in socioeconomic rights, getting socioeconomic rights into the Constitution. He would also have been flattered by the last one. It was a posthumous award, Gauteng Province. He would be very flattered to be called a legend. But I think he's a legend. Thank you very much.
We're going to trade up to the SABC can...
Okay, thanks. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Ivan. So now we're going to have our first song by Makudu and Lisa.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Madonsela, and this is Lisa Engelbrecht. And we are going to start by singing a song that's called Lerato la Mme Pele Safele. It's a song that I wrote in honor of all mothers because of the relentlessness of mothers to see the lives of their children being improved. And I think it's fitting for this occasion because of the relentless work this man we're here to celebrate did to see the lives of the children of South Africa become better for the future.
Thank you very much. One of the things my dad truly believed in is drawing strength from the incredible history and richness of Africa. Africa's been through some terrible times of colonialism, of slavery, and so on. But it has so much to offer the world, and what you just heard was an example of African singers producing music of international quality. South Africa is known for many things. Rugby is one of them. it also represents an interest of my dad to see South Africa stand up on a world stage. And music, whether it was science or maths or economics or whatever it was, he very much believed in engaging with the world and drawing on South Africa's history and Africa's history as a source of strength. So our next speaker, we are thrilled to welcome Thuli Nomkosi Madonsela, who was a child of informal traders in Soweto, went to high school and university in Swaziland, and then took her LLB at Wits. So using her legal training, she was active in the ANC, in the trade union movement. She helped to draft the constitution of the new South Africa under Nelson Mandela. I was pleased to note on her biography that her first job was as a teacher in Swaziland and then in Soweto. So she was appointed public protector in 2009 and of course generated the landmark reports, Secure in Comfort 2014, State of Capture in 2016, delivered to in such a spectacular manner at the end of her 7-year term. She's also raised 2 children single-handedly after her husband passed away early. So now Thuli is a professor at Stellenbosch. She's the founder of the Tuma Foundation. She's a chair and center director for the Center in Social Justice. And I've no doubt she's planning even more spectacular interventions. I can't help but mention something I'm very proud of, which is that Thuli recently joined the governing board of AIMS, which I haven't mentioned. So for the AIMS people here, please come and say hello afterwards to one of your bosses. So please may we welcome Thuli Madonsela. Can we? I wonder if we can move it forward once more. Okay. And are you going to hold this, or shall I? I could hold.
No, it's okay. Thank you. Thank you for the kind introduction, Neil. Greetings to Dr. Mary Turok and the Turok family, and my deepest condolences. To the whole of South Africa, greetings. On the one hand, we mourn the passing of one of South Africa's greatest human beings and impactful leaders. However, we also celebrate a life well lived. It is said that when you have a long life, it is a blessed life, but I'm not sure that all long lives are a blessing, but certainly we've just listened to what Ivan has shared with us, most of which we all know, and you will agree with me that it was a life well lived. But what is a life well lived? Firstly, every human being wants to belong. We get into families, we start our little families because we want to belong. We get into churches because, of course, we want to worship God, but we also want to belong. If it's not a church, it could be a Muslim group, it could be a Baha'i group, Jewish, etc. But we get into these groups because we want to belong. We form countries because we want to belong. It's just a standard thing that humans have a yearning to belong. And I once read somewhere where it said that the human beings will do just about anything to belong, to stay in the group. That's why young boys will kill to stay in a gang group, that desire to belong. That's why some people might even consider terminating their life if they feel that they don't belong. Why is it so important that people belong? One psychologist suggests that it's a remnant of our genetic coding. That early human settlements were close-knit groups, and everyone had to comply with the rules in order to stay as a member of the group. And if you did not comply with the rules, you were kicked out. And being kicked out of the group meant death, either killed by another tribe or killed by animals, or dying because of hunger or loneliness. And therefore, that's why everyone has wanted to stay with the group. That's why everyone plays along. That's why everyone, when I did the Nkandla report, everyone voted with their parties. Nobody wanted to step out of line because everyone wanted to belong. So why does somebody like Professor Ben Turok step out of line? I thought I would use my time and share what I learned from him, from the association I had with him, from the days of drafting the RDP to my days as public protector and his days as the co-chairperson of the Joint Committee of Ethics in Parliament, and more recently in the last 3 years, working together on socio-economic inclusion and social justice. The first thing that I learned from him is the courage to step out of line. In his book, With My Head Above the Parapet, he outlines the cost of stepping out. Well, you don't die, like it happened in primitive society, but there is a social death that comes with stepping out of line. And why would a person step out of line? In his case, we will recall that there are two instances where Professor Ben Turok stepped out of line from his group. The one that everyone knows of is the one on the Protection of Information Bill, or this what we refer to as the Secrecy Bill. However, I don't think that was the main reason he ended up annoying some of his colleagues. I think it's his role as the joint chairperson of ethics in Parliament. I think he suddenly learned, as many people who are enforcers of ethics learn, is that there is an unwritten mafia code. Do your work thoroughly, but don't touch the family. And when he started touching the family fought back. But in his view, it was worth fighting. We've just listened to his life story. It's clear that from as long as he was in his teens, he went on a quest for justice. And his quest for justice was not justice as just us. It was justice as justice for all. I haven't read something interesting about the character of apartheid that many people don't understand. People would say, my father worked hard. I met a very good man, a very lovely man yesterday who said, I don't understand why people are hating on us. I never got anything during apartheid. I work hard. I was just an ordinary worker. I never hurt anyone. Why does anybody ask me to apologize? But Prof. Turok understood that under apartheid, as long as you worked hard and you were white, you were guaranteed social mobility, which meant there were two factors. It was what you brought into it and what the system gave to you. But he also then understood to whom much is given, much is expected. So he sought this quest. He understood where his parents had come from, running away from repression, and he wanted a world without repression, a world where there's justice for all, because that was a world based on peace. So, with the Mafia Code, for example, when he did one of his great investigations, it led to the disciplining of Minister Thuli, Minister Dina Thuli, who eventually had to leave Parliament. One of the reasons I think he really did what he believed was right, I believe that it had to do with a sense of belonging that I started with. How do you belong when what you are forced to do does not resonate with what you believe is right? Because you can't belong on the outside when in the inside you are dying. He didn't want to be the walking dead. I never saw him drinking, so he probably was not one of those people who are then going to drown their sorrows in drink or gambling or some other pathological behavior. He had to do things that resonated with his soul. He had to do things that resonate with what he believed was right. And I think also, just on stepping out, I also think that Professor Turok understood that everything has a cost. Because those who will do something that is unethical in order to stay in the inner circle think they are avoiding cost. The cost of being excluded. The truth is there's a cost, and it's dual. The first cost is the cost to your peace of mind, that you'll never be at peace. And how do people deal with that cost? Is more money, more management of people's perceptions. Because if I perceive myself to be bad, and yet I want to be good, I will invest so much in managing how you perceive me. Because I know what I see in the mirror every day. I see a person that I don't like. I see a person who doesn't do what I believe should be done. And I think he probably didn't want that. So there's a cost to doing the wrong thing, but there's also a cost which is further down the line when the truth is discovered, everything you've built will tumble down. But the final cost is we all want a functional country. We all want a functional world. But we all have to keep asking ourselves, are we part of the problem or are we part of the solution? Because the problems we have of an unethical world today did not start with the Zuma government. I believe that what happened during state capture had rootings in what we didn't address incrementally. It just then bent like a wildfire, and it's only then that we noticed that we have a problem. But for him, he had always believed that if I believe in something, I will stand for it. But he did more than that. He made sure that he influenced and inspired the rest of us to think like him and to act accordingly. That's called leadership. The art of inspiring inspiring and influencing yourself and others to think and act in a particular way. So the second lesson I learned from him is the generosity to share space. From when he was involved in the RDP, it was a collaborative process. When he investigated the Thuli matter, I was public protector, I was investigating the same matter. Him and his colleagues shared some of the information with us, and we shared the information with them. When they did the code, the parliamentary code on code of ethics, they brought in the intellectuals in the country and experts who are working on ethics, including Chapter 9 institutions, and got their views on what should be contained. In fact, one of the things we were going to do, based on the workshop that Prof. Turok and his colleagues organized, was to emerge with a country code of ethics. Because one of the problems is that each institution sets its own standards on what is ethical and what is not ethical. And often some of those standards are too low. You'll remember the IEC case, for example. The IEC thought they were in line with their own code of conduct, but in terms of universally what was right and what was wrong, they were not right. And many ministers have found themselves in trouble because their own interpretation of the code had a lower threshold. So the idea was to come up with something that is universal. And I think for those in government, consideration should be given to one universal code of conduct from everyone, from cleaner to president and from municipality to national government, in addition to specific departmental codes and professional codes. The other area of collaboration was economic justice, which is something he felt very strongly about, and you've seen a whole lot of the books that he has written. And one of the areas where I joined him was the round table he had on confronting inequality in 2017, and we've worked together since then. From our side, we've organized various events. He was 90. He never missed a single event on economic justice and on social justice. And one of the contributions that he made was one that we did with the Institute for Sustainability with Mike Swelling, and we will be distributing copies of the outcomes, because he was concerned that as long as there's others who are left behind, democracy is not working for all. And if democracy does not work for all, not everyone has an interest in democracy. And we have then a problem in our hands. He also participated more recently, very, very recently as in August last year, in the National Summit on social justice. And his ability to collaborate there came from a mindset that says whatever he knows does not mean that if somebody knows more, it would diminish his knowledge. And also, he came from the understanding that he may disagree with you on some things, but we can work on where we agree. I remember on that summit, for example, where he noted that there was agreement between him and Premier Zille. Premier Zille was still the premier then. And that became a basis for moving forward, that we all agree on what South Africa should look like at the end of the tunnel. Where we disagree is what does it look like now, and what are the pathways for going there. But already we have a basis for talking. He had the humility to learn, and you can see that in the way he interacted with young people here after the fees must fall. He understood that there's a lot we can teach young people about leadership for impact, but there's a lot we can learn from young people on issues such as decolonization, etc. And he thought young people were the future. He walked the talk. That's another lesson. And one of the things, of course, that he really, really disliked was lateness. And he was never late. So he walked his talk. He also walked his talk on integrity. And hence he was prepared to walk away all by himself if his group was not going to go with him. I don't know of him ever having been involved in any scandal. He had the wisdom to adapt. Darwin said that the species that survives is the species, it's the fittest. And often people make a mistake to think this, when Darwin said spoke about the survival of the fittest, he meant the strongest. The strongest can break. He meant adaptable. And Ben Turok, think about somebody who was born in 1929, still being relevant as a leader to young people in 2019. That is adaptability, that is emotional agility, intellectual agility, and social agility. And that's something we can only learn from him around adapting to environment, remaining intelligent, remaining knowledgeable, but being able to absorb new knowledge, being able to work with others and collaborate with others to achieve. And then lastly, the resilience to carry on. And timeless leadership. And why was his leadership timeless? It was the kind of leadership that is ethical, purpose-driven, impact-conscious, and committed to serve. Now it's our time to take the baton and move forward from where he left us. The world is crying out for ethical leadership. The world is crying out for economic and other forms of social justice. He didn't betray the challenges of his generation. And every generation has a responsibility and opportunity to identify the most pressing challenge of its time. We need to identify ours, and I hope we've done so, and we need not to betray the duty of our generation. I have a sense, though, seeing the shift moments out there, we're equal to the task. We will not betray the giants such as Ben Turok, who gave up everything to get us where we are. It's our turn now to make sure that we don't betray ourselves, we don't betray the previous generation, and above everything else, we don't betray the future generations from whom we have borrowed this land. Thank you. Deepest condolences.
Thank you, Thuli, for that marvelous speech. Our next speaker is, we're going to have our next song. So, do you want to, I guess you will announce what the song is? Yes. So, our next song with Lisa and Makudu. I'll take this off.
And sing for you some classical music, which I understand Professor really loved.
Can you switch songs?
Well, a moving tribute indeed to late ANC stalwart that Dr. Ben Turok there. Former public protector Thuli Madonsela just wrapped up her address at that memorial service a little while ago. She's really speaking about and
Well, I can't think of a better epitome of excellence, which is something my dad profoundly believed in. Take the best from the world, and only the best is good enough for South Africa and for Africa. So our next speaker is another remarkable individual. Pallo Jordan was the son of two academics, and I've just confirmed with him that his father was actually the first black professor at UCT in 1946, and which overlaps with what Ivan was saying. UCT was a great place, but rather slow to transform, and I guess Pallo's dad was a leading light in that respect. Now, Pallo himself became a leading intellectual figure in the ANC. He himself was almost killed in a bomb in Mozambique. He became head of communications in the ANC and director of Radio Freedom in Angola, and then head of the ANC research unit, as well as a ANC NEC committee member for a long time. His name was a commonplace in our household because he wrote many absolutely seminal publications during that era of the liberation struggle. A life of an analysis of Moses Kotane, analysis of the Soweto uprising in 1976, and an analysis of the South African liberation movement, which I know was an inspiration for my dad, and his own analysis, which Ivan has already referred to. Pallo was part of the negotiating team which representing the ANC, which Oliver Tambo led, including Mac Maharaj and Chris Hani and Thabo Mbeki, who met with South African business leaders in Zambia in the late 80s and began the negotiations around the ending of apartheid. Pallo served as a minister in government from 1994. He was Minister of Communications, then Minister for Environment and Tourism. He was chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and then Minister of Arts and Culture until 2009. He was also a columnist for Business Day. I know in the latter years of my dad's life, he worked very closely with Pallo, always on New Agenda, on IFA. Pallo was a board member of both, and I guess they talked all the time. So let us all please welcome Pallo Jordan. Okay, thanks. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. To the Turok family and to the grandchildren and other offspring. This way? Okay. I want to extend my heartfelt condolences, but I also don't want to begin on a note of mourning, because I think we are here to celebrate a life, and as Thuli Madonsela has said, a very well-lived life, a life in struggle. I want to take a slightly different tack from the previous speaker, who spoke about the importance of the group belonging, about the importance of the collective to the human being. I once observed a documentary about a group of primates, a pre-human collective. Macaque monkeys living on a beach in Japan, and a group of scientists had come to study these monkeys. And in order to give themselves the chance to watch them closely, what they did was brought a big bag of sweet potatoes. But the sweet potatoes were covered with muck and dirt, And they thought, well, we give these monkeys these sweet potatoes, they'll have to spend time cleaning them, and we can observe them. They did it. They brought the bag, they dropped it there. And of course, the monkeys took up the sweet potatoes, started cleaning them to eat them. But one female monkey broke with the rest of the troop. And she took her sweet potato, walked down to the water, and she washed it. And she washed it, it was clean, and she ate it. The others observed her and said, hey, that's a good idea. And they all went down and washed their sweet potatoes and ate them. Now, I think that is also a dimension of collective life we should never lose sight of. Because much as the collective is important for the human psyche, for the well-being of the human being, and for what is the perceived collective good, so too is the one who breaks ranks, the pioneer, the one who thinks slightly differently from the rest, is just as important for the good of the collective. We must never lose sight of that. Ben Turok was amongst a group of immigrants from the Baltic states who settled in South Africa during the 1920s and the 30s, and who played a very significant role in our liberation movement, specifically the socialist component of that liberation movement. In that respect, the song we just heard about the high places made plain and the valleys being exalted and the crooked straight is a very important dimension also of the human vision. And that's what socialists strove for. Because of the singular contribution this group of immigrants made, their names have become legendary. Ray Alexander Simons, Ray Adler, Eli Weinberg, Joe Slover, these amongst the roll of honor in our struggle. And I think to that list you can also add the name of Benjamin Turok. Benny acquired a national profile during the 1950s, shortly after the Defiance campaign, when a collective was created to try to bring together those whites who were committed to democracy to take an active part in the struggle for freedom. It was founded in 1953 and it dubbed itself the Congress of Democrats. Ben Turok was its first general secretary. Coming into politics at that point, the 1950s, historic moment characterized by mass struggles, unprecedented in the past, he was, in a sense, thrown in at the deep end, deployed to the front lines almost immediately. And he remained there, and he played a very distinguished role in that capacity till the end of his days. When Comrade Benny passed away, a journalist asked me to comment on his passing. And amongst other things, what I thought was important to say about Ben is to comment about his unflagging political courage, which marked him out as someone who always led from the front. As we saw from the slide, he was very integrally involved in the campaign for the Congress of the People. He played a very prominent role at the Kliptown Conference itself. He was amongst the treason trial accused in 1956. And he also served on that small committee operating underground in 1960, which announced the existence of an underground South African Communist Party. He was also amongst the first recruits into Mkhonto Wesizwe. So this is the man deployed to the front lines, and he led from the front. It's the economy, stupid. That became a very much overridden phrase during the Clinton administration in the United States. Ben, as we know, is credited with the inclusion of the two economic clauses in the Freedom Charter, Clause 3 and Clause 4, which refer directly to the economy. Both the supporters of our democratic government and its critics measure its performance on the basis of the economy. Palpable economic disadvantage and disempowerment, which had been evolved in some 3 centuries of colonialism and racial oppression, has made the economy the principal area of grievance amongst our people. While the ANC as government has striven to overcome many of the distortions we inherited from apartheid, we have to admit it has been constrained by the compromises we reached in 1994 and in the years thereafter. Tough questions have to be posed, and a critical self-evaluation is obviously necessary when the ANC administers an economy that has made South Africa one of the most unequal societies in the world. An economy in which job losses are announced on a regular basis. An economy in which, while the capitalist monopolies who dominate South Africa are obviously reluctant to invest in the country's economy, and a society in which we can only address the worst consequences of poverty through an elaborate welfare scheme. Ben was always prepared to ask the tough questions and to engage in introspection, the introspection that is so necessary if we are to respond to the challenges the democratic breakthrough of 1994 presents us with. There is a self-evident distance between our present-day circumstances and the promises of the Freedom Charter. The ANC 1969 Morogoro Conference asserted that the seizure of political power in the absence of economic power would not amount to real liberation. Since the ANC assumed political office in 1994, Ben Turok has been amongst those who has consistently sought the answers by interrogating government policy and government practice. The progressive political agenda the ANC has pursued through legislation on gender, workers' rights, environmental policies, and in a host of other interventions has undoubtedly made South Africa a much better place than it was in 1994. But the frequently posed question is, could the ANC have chosen a different path? I think it's clear to everyone that administering this highly racialized post-colonial capitalist order in the 21st century is a very, very tough challenge indeed. There is that intricate dialectic of race, color, class, and gender rooted in conquest and dispossession. And it has impacted on every facet of South African life in the past, and its impact extends even into our post-apartheid context. The template on which South African capitalism was built remains largely unchanged. And in the baggage of that unaltered template, we find a number of the vices that we characterize as a colonialism of a special type. Speaking in 2012, then Deputy President Kgalema Motlanthe observed, and I quote him, "Sadly, mining has remained a prisoner of its apartheid past in its core element of cheap labor sourced through a migrant laborer's punishing annual work cycle and the social evils associated with that cycle. No amount of employment equity plans and empowerment transactions have ventured to tamper with this," close quote. Ben Turok regarded the elaboration of a developmental path that would result in a decisive break with what we call colonialism of the special type. A path that would grow our economy in a manner that would not only develop our productive forces, but would also reconfigure the racial, class, and gender relations bequeathed to us by apartheid. The question he consistently raised was, has government policy successfully addressed these challenges since 1994? We all accept that compromise was necessary to reach the 27th of April 1994. But that was a compromise that wasn't based on a recognition on our part that there was anything legitimate in the claims of the white minority regime. The compromise, in many instances, can be said to have been based on a realistic assessment of the balance of economic and military power. And that is what persuaded us to negotiate. Necessity imposed compromises that we hope would assist us to effect a significant shift in the power balance. Under the ANC stewardship, limited land reform measures to protect labor tenants and agricultural workers were in fact passed in 1996 and 97. The Land Bank, which you must always remember, Louis Botha's government established in 1912 in anticipation of the 1913 Natives Land Act. That too was marginally transformed to make its mission a little bit more transformative. A number of institutional devices, BEE, employment equity, affirmative action, were also harnessed to try and ensure that there would be an orderly change. And modest as these legislative instruments are, they have encountered stiff opposition and resistance from those previously advantaged by racism. And just recently, the main opposition party reaffirmed its determination to oppose them. Yes, indeed, it is the economy. And those who dominate it and control it in the last instance continue to determine the future of our country. At that same Morogoro Consultative Conference, the ANC had adopted a document that says inter alia, and I quote again, "Our nationalism must not be confused with chauvinism or narrow nationalism of a previous epoch. It must not be confused with the classical drive by an elitist group among the oppressed people to gain ascendancy so that they can replace the oppressor in the exploitation of the mass." These were themes that were underscored in the Green Book, which the ANC produced in 1979. And in that Green Book, there's even greater emphasis, where we say to postpone the advocacy of this perspective until the first stage of democratic power has been achieved is to risk dominance within our revolution by purely nationalist forces which see themselves as replacing the white exploiters at the time of the people's victory, close quote. Ironically, for a movement that had the prescience to warn against such developments, the ANC has found it very difficult to address them. Social justice was the central concern of the liberation movement, but we had to put that on the back burner during the 4 years of negotiations between 1990 and 94. But once we're in political office, many argued that there was no alternative, that it was far wiser that we adopt our own structural adjustment program, lest one be imposed on us by the IMF. The outcome, as we know, is that there is now a huge social deficit expressed in the Gini coefficient, that yawning gap between the rich and the poor, and also expressed in our highly gendered and racialized poverty. The old exploiter classes have not been replaced. What tends to happen is the assimilation of the emergent black capitalist classes by those old exploiter classes who have never relinquished power. What we are witnessing is the emergence of property-owning classes from amongst what was formerly a propertyless and historically oppressed community, who are using their control of state power as an accumulation strategy and an accumulation path. This is a typically South African pattern. Control of the state in the 19th century resulted in what one might call white economic empowerment measures. And these date back to the so-called diggers' democracy in Kimberley in the 1870s. These were followed by your Natives Land Act 1913, Natives Urban Areas Act 1923, Asiatic Land Tenure Act 1946, Group Areas Act 1951, Job Reservation Act 1953. All these were measures in which the state was deliberately used as an instrument of capital accumulation by one section of our society. The rapacious character of these emergent black property classes emulates the conduct of their white predecessors almost in every respect. The scandalous conduct testified to in the Zondo Commission is almost an exact rerun of the conduct of the landlords of the past and of the Van der Merwes and Hogenheimers of the Cape just a few decades ago. Consequently, the character of the South African economy has not changed. That mineral energy complex on which South African capitalism was built still dominates the economy, and many of the colonial features still survive. Our government has also been extremely cautious in its relations with big capital. Important South African corporations are now listed on the London Stock Exchange, which disguises them as British companies. We must think seriously about what that means. After 1994, the ANC in government has regrettably presided over the emergence of a rapacious black bourgeoisie who are determined to emulate their Anglo and Afrikaner predecessors, employing control of the state as the accumulation path. A crisis of confidence in the leadership of the ANC has found expression in events like the Marikana massacre in 2012, in the loss of key municipalities during the 2016 municipal elections, And that included Port Elizabeth. That included Port Elizabeth. For decades, many of us regarded Port Elizabeth as the Petrograd of the South African Revolution, that the ANC could lose the support of the people of Port Elizabeth says a hell of a lot, something we have to weigh seriously. All that owing to massive abstention on election day to punish the ANC at the ballot box. But we must ask ourselves this question: were the people of PE better off for having done that? Are the people of Tshwane better off with that DA-led coalition? Are those of Johannesburg better off? In historic terms, whatever the mistakes it has made and will make, the ANC in government has been attempting to breathe life into what was, for the past century, the political agenda and vision of South Africa's Democrats. We must not forget that. And when we think about punishing the ANC at the ballot box, we should bear that in mind, because just as the ANC pursued the vision of a democratic society, we should interrogate the history of the other parties. Have they pursued a democratic agenda? Never mind what names they assume. The struggle of the peoples of the Third World, whom Frantz Fanon dubbed the wretched of the earth, has indeed made very impressive gains since the end of the Second World War. But none of these struggles has yet produced a society in which the quest for freedom has not been compromised for the sake of the struggle for bread. When the ANC assumed office in 1994, it undertook that it would pursue these two objectives in tandem, and its performance will be judged on how successfully it navigates that course. Way back in 1997, seems a long time ago now, I had, in a paper that I wrote, suggested that the South African transition was an unfinished revolution. And though I still hold that our revolution is incomplete, we must recognize that it has wrought impressive social political changes. Democracy required at least two basic conditions. One, an adult suffrage, and two, the repeal of all racist laws that institutionalize racial inequality. Democracy threw open the doors of opportunity to those formerly barred, and the statutory abolition of racism has so transformed the political culture of our country that the political traditions, principles, and values advocated by the liberation movement have now become hegemonic in South Africa. There's no political party that contests elections in this country that dares say it is for racism, that dares say it is for racial inequality, that dares say it is opposed to the idea of universal franchise. But you'll all remember, these were treasonable ideas not too very long ago. So the lives of millions of South Africa have changed, but the societal outcomes produced by racial oppression still dominate the lives of far too many of our people. Political circumstance and our own tactical reasoning persuaded us to accept much less than what we had fought for in 1994. We reasoned then that democracy would be a significant strategic beachhead for further advance. However, necessary at this point to stress that much as that was a wise tactical decision, I don't think we have been able to take full advantage of that. The ANC and the movement it led had the strategy to galvanize the social and political forces across class and race lines to defeat the racist regime. And that's why it dominates South African society and politics today. Like many of us who were in exile, Ben had the opportunity to observe the lived experience of post-colonialism in Africa and in Asia. His recognition of the centrality of the economy convinced Ben that South Africa, but the rest of the continent, also needed its own developmental path. Hence, the Institute for an African Alternative, which he founded and led, produces the journal New Agenda. That was an effort to explore those possibilities. To Ben, it had become evident that the Soviet model was not working. You also recognize that the IMF and the World Bank, with their structural adjustment programs, merely impoverished developing countries and brought more misery to the common people. Amongst ANC supporters and the veterans of MK, there is a profound appreciation of the maladies afflicting our country's economy. And we have tried to mobilize all sectors of our society to try to address them. But I think if we seriously want to raise our nation's morale, the challenge facing us is to renew the movement that led this country to freedom, because that movement sadly needs renewal. Ben dedicated the last years of his life to doing that. And as we celebrate that life in struggle, I think the best way to honor Benny is to keep on fighting. The struggle continues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me just, yeah, it's a huge thing.
Coming down the bed.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for. Thank you for that. Is this the rubbing? Another one? Thank you for that wonderful speech, which I very much hope and expect will be published. So now we're on to our third song. And please, can you introduce it?
The next piece is a piece that comes out of an opera written by Mozart. It's called Ich baue ganz auf deine Stärke, meaning I place all of my
much better than me. Born in Joburg to a cleaner and a domestic servant, became a student activist, trade unionist, and a member of the Mkoto Wasiswa. In 1976, he went to prison for 11 months, engaged in activities not too different than my dad. Apparently didn't learn his lesson, because in 1977 he was sentenced to 10 years in Northern Ireland. But upon his release, he became Secretary General of the National Union of Mine Workers, and eventually the ANC Secretary General. He was Deputy President of this country from 2007 to 2012, and including a brief period as President, succeeding Thuli Most recently, his activities involve the Kgalema Motlanthe Foundation, which lists its program as fostering inclusive discourse, creative solutions, reconciliation, and community building. All things I know my dad would have very strongly supported. I was very pleased to see on your website that you're now offering university bursaries for maths and science students, which resonates very strongly with those of us involved in AIMS. So thank you for that. He's led the Drakensberg process most recently, which I very much hope he will speak about. He is chair of IFA, the chair of the board of IFA, the Institute for African Alternatives we've heard about, and also chair of the editorial board of New Agenda, which is the magazine we have. So please let us all welcome Kgalema Motlanthe.
Thank you very much, Program Director. As we condole with Aunt Mary and the entire Turok family, one is also overpowered by a sense of ambivalence, in the sense that we are here to celebrate a great life and also condole with the family. So it is an honor to commemorate, remember, and re-examine the life and work of Professor Ben Turok with you today. Through this deep process, we are compelled to rethink what it means to live and die for one's beliefs. Like many of his comrades and peers, and like all of us, in a sense, Professor Ben Turok is at once a product and a creator of history, a child of his own environment. Today's memorial meeting and the moving tributes share the attributes of a man who proved to be nothing less than a great role model, a consistent moral leader of our time, whose lifelong dedication to the fight against oppression and injustice helped deliver freedom to our country. Comrade Ben Turok was one among many who sacrificed their all to attain liberation and democracy, many of whom are not with us today, but like them and like many of us here, we have been at the center of one of the most powerful political dramas the world has ever seen. Comrade Turok's generation's single-minded devotion to the people of Africa has collectively shifted the nation and global community towards human rights and racial equality. Today's thorough depiction of Professor Turok, his life and his work aptly describes a visionary who led us through the vast expanse of political, social, and economic struggle. With the Freedom Charter as a roadmap, he helped navigate the liberation movement towards a struggle based on ethics, sacrifice, and intellectualism. Comrade Ben's history reminds us not to sink and drown into the political ocean, but to dig our feet into the sand and hammer with all our might against the waves of despair, to be buoyant and agile in our mindset and see through the sediment of insidious plots that aim to steer our ship off course. He reminds us not to divorce ourselves from our ongoing duty to apply our mind, question our motives, audit our successes, and scrutinize on a granular level our modes of operation. Through the eloquent and insightful recounts of Comrade Ben by his family, his son, Professor Ivan Turok, Professor Thuli Madonsela, and Comrade Pallo Jordan, we grasp an important piece of history and learn what kind of conviction and force drove Ben Turok. And we remind ourselves that history is important precisely because it gives us context and is a foundation for the project of social cohesion. To learn the lessons of our past, to understand and confront challenges of our present, and to have an honest and open dialogue about our collective future, we need to revisit history and humanize what it means to struggle. The late Professor Keorapetse Kgositsile, who was a great poet, in his poem entitled "The Present is a Dangerous Place to Live," and I quote the last stanza in that poem, I quote, "Time will always be. Past, present, future is always now. Where then is the life we came to live?" Close quote. And he writes past, present, future as one word. Comrades, ladies and gentlemen, there is an urgent sense of impatience in South Africa, a latent panic and unease that underpins our daily doubt, despair, and distress. This memorial service offers us connections to truths beyond an individual, a reflection of who we are, our wisdom gained, and our wisdom lost. A chance to become like Turok and be on the right side of history. When contemplating and appreciating the legacy of a selfless leader, we should ask ourselves, what do we inherit from this hero? Within one of Professor Ben Turok's final requests for a private ceremony, rather than anything official or formal, in view of the present predicament facing the country, is a poignant metaphor for his selfless style of leadership and his approach to activism. We are exposed to his core values in this single statement and are encouraged to consider the heirloom of great leaders and examine the importance of social inheritance. The intergenerational transmission of Turok's ethics, attitudes, and actions must be the starting point of appreciating and celebrating the legacy of any hero. This is our inheritance. We are the heirs to the virtues of this revolutionary thought leader, shepherd of truth and struggle icon. In this and in many of Turok's public statements, he asks each and every one of us to re-examine whether what we are fed by the status quo is what we actually need. And in true Turok fashion, it is an ongoing criticism of passivity and of corrupt governance. In this, we may also interpret an appeal from Professor Ben Turok for us to challenge our social inheritance, not to accept the route that has been selected for us by mounting challenges and the hollowing out of leadership. Turok believed that government was not doing enough to pursue economic policies that ensured inclusive economic growth. He believed and understood that we are running out of time and that we need a radical approach to governing South Africa. Turok's robust opinions on the economy were shared and echoed at the inaugural Drakensberg Inclusive Growth Forum in 2018, a gathering of a broad cross-section of thought leaders and organizations, including communities, governmental bodies, political groups, trade unions, youth, vulnerable populations, civil society, the international community, and the private sector to deliberate on important societal issues and engage in dialogue. These forums aim to ignite collaborative action and to address challenges was firmly met by Professor Ben Turok's potent observations in a panel discussion on the stage. His contributions included that self-enrichment and a departure from the strong moral values so eloquently captured in the preamble to the Constitution are at the heart of government's failure to lead and service the people of South Africa. His observations highlighted that South Africa has not clearly spelled out the economic legacy of apartheid and the inequality of wealth this created, which is perpetuated by the continued dominance of the apartheid profit model, and that there is unfinished business that has been pushed into the background by state capture crisis. He went on to warn that more research needs to be done on international institutions and implications of foreign direct investment generally, and that we do not confront the financial sector players as we should, and that their policies deny, limit, and exclude many citizens from accessing requisite capital. Turok further calls for alternative ways of economic development, urges us to deal specifically with the economic legacy of apartheid, and that transformation is inhibited because South Africa is oversensitive to the IMF, World Bank, and similar institutions, and it is reluctant to change to economic policy that is not aligned with these organizations for fear that we might lose international respectability. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in nothing short of a crisis right now. The question of how to rebuild South Africa assumes that South Africa has, at one point in its existence, enjoyed status of a well-constructed and built-up society, economy, and political sphere. The prolonged destruction that South Africa has been subjected to goes back for generations. This guides us to ask the question whether our country in some way experiences a constant state of being fractured or broken without opportunity to fully construct the South Africa of our dreams. The last period of troubled years have been dominated by discourse that draws attention to the wide-reaching extent of corruption, dually intersecting in unethical business and political partnerships, crises in Eskom and other state-owned enterprises, and repeated demonstrations and social upheavals even along historical fault lines of race. We are constantly haunted by all of this. The project of social cohesion and nation-building efforts is under continuous threat. A dedicated commitment must be made across all sectors of society, government, business, civil unions, and communities to invest in a system of opportunity and inclusion for all. This distinct attitude and change will offer a concrete basis for the true development and construction of South Africa by providing the power to unlock our full potential. South Africa needs to look beyond the familiar ways of doing business and understand that what has worked in the past is clearly not working today. There is no panacea to our socio-economic problems and to our financial woes. Eskom is South Africa's top risk. The crisis at Eskom threatens the entire country. State-owned utility can't manage to cover its costs and make the huge interest payments on its mountain of debt. Its poorly maintained power plants are struggling to meet demand, and it has lost many experienced chief executive officers, board members, and highly skilled staff over the years. Eskom can be described as the biggest risk to the country's economy. Corruption and mismanagement have induced the brain drain at Eskom and other state-owned companies, with over-regulation and availability of skills as a top concern. State-owned companies are not facing one single challenge, but a multiplicity of problems that, if not properly diagnosed, any turnaround strategy would only address symptoms that are on the surface. But time is not on the side of South African economy. Its impatient population and generation of youth counting on us to lay strong foundations for their future attest to this reality. In order to refocus these state-owned companies on the growth and developmental functions, the Pan-African Investment and Research Services offered the following recommendations to revive growth, with an emphasis on defining a set of programs and/or feasible interventions where state-owned companies could work together to create momentum for investments, industrialization, and job creation. The first of the recommendation is that there is a need for clear ownership policy that defines the overall relations and rationale for state ownership, the state role in corporate governance of state-owned enterprises, and how government will implement its ownership policy needs to be in place. And secondly, there should be constant monitoring and evaluation of these entities with focus on both the manner of their operations, how they deploy capital, and their development effectiveness. And thirdly, state-owned enterprises should justify themselves before the rationale of value creation for the public and with clear developmental impact. Where there is no clear comparative advantage or potential to develop it, and where there is no developmental value yielded, such enterprises should be allowed to die rather than be on an expensive life support. Fourthly, at the minimum, these entities should abide by existing corporate governance norms, including the Companies Act, Public Finance Management Act, and King IV Codes of Good Governance. For this to be possible, boards should be selected on a merit-based system and made up of individuals known for not only tested expertise, but also for their integrity and grasp of ethics. Finally, as the Organization for the Economic Cooperation and Development Guidelines on Corporate Governance of SOEs suggest, these entities should have a disclosure policy that identifies what information should be publicly disclosed and clear processes on obtaining such information. Accountability and transparency should be proactive. There is a general view that government ownership can have certain advantages such as furthering social outcomes as well as providing physical infrastructure. Yet it is indicated that it is vital that a value creation approach be followed as it provides a framework when considering whether government should have and or should retain an ownership stake in an enterprise. In addition to the recommendations to revive state-owned companies, it is important for us to look at the alternative methods of driving sustainable and inclusive growth. A sense of leadership during troubled times compels us to think innovatively, venturing out into the uncharted waters and bringing into the national fold new ways and eyes of looking into matters that, in the end, drastically changes the quality of life of ordinary people. At the 2019 Drakensberg Inclusive Growth Forum, we were left with a positive outlook that focused on South Africa's existing endowments as an important factor in economic transformation and revival. These include South Africa's strategic location, the potential of our oceans economy, and the vast deposit of natural resources as a substantial geographic advantage. Allow me to refer to the maritime world, blue or oceans economy, what Commander Tsietsi Mokgele, former South African Maritime Safety Authority CEO, referred to as South Africa's 10th province. With the discovery of oil on South African shores and South Africa being the only country on the African continent with such an expansive access and control over sea waters from the Atlantic Ocean in the west to the Southern Ocean, the Antarctic and Indian Ocean in the east, our maritime potential is extensive and the economic benefits are boundless. According to recent findings of the International Labour Organization, green economy policies could create around 40 million jobs worldwide in various sectors. considering the green economy as part of our sustainable development path, addresses the interdependence between energy production, economic growth, social protection, and the natural ecosystem. Within this, the private sector and civil society must play a fundamental role. These rich endowments of minerals, oil, gas, wind, and sun place South Africa in good stead as potentially becoming a continuing source of economic growth and influence in the continent of Africa. The world's eyes are on Africa as the next big economic growth story, and it is vitally important to ensure that this growth benefits all Africans. Agility in this ever-changing terrain is a fundamental element in developing modern business strategy. With South Africa's economic growth in the spotlight of emerging economies, we are the ideal springboard for the region not to simply be an observer in the evolving technologies, but to be a globally relevant participant in the fourth industrial revolution. Carving a space for public and private sectors to explore and design new workforce systems, we need to assist the workforce to adequately interact with new technologies, actively driving the digital era forward within all sectors of the economy. Our new reality is controlled by digital technology, and access to this technology is a universal human right. Digital inclusion allows people to access the economy, communicate freely, be ready for the jobs of the future, enjoy the rights to education, freedom of expression, health, and much more. It quickly becomes obvious why digital inclusion is so important and considered a universal human right. With the acceleration of digital technology driving change in every market sector and the necessity to adapt to these new conditions reaching increasing speeds, we must develop young talent through educational platforms that boost access to technology and develop digital literacy. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Ben Turok rebelled against the pitfalls and traditions of contemporary South African politics and made a move to formulate a new theory of how the world should work. He asked of us to root out and discuss anything that, on reflection, results in negative influences, to continually test and challenge our existing mindset and refine and improve it all the time. In Comrade Ben Turok, foresight and rebelliousness are equivalent in imbuing him with a sense of uncanny balance towards life. In his autobiography, Nothing But the Truth, Ben Turok concluded, and I quote, "Indeed, it may be that throughout my political life in the ANC, I've been driven by ideas rather than practical politics, trying to move the process faster than objective reality allowed," close quote. In his objective to offer fresh ideas and create a mindset change among leaders, he inspired a movement of innovation and creative problem solving, essential qualities necessary for the 21st century and the energy needed to invent sustainable solutions to the challenges that face our communities. What Professor Ben Turok has left us with is an inheritance of ideas to assimilate, deliberate, and meditate on for many years to come, a legacy of firm and clear-cut guidance that reflects the hopes and dreams contained in the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. He and his peers made the African National Congress the conscience of the nation. They demanded of themselves the highest level of ethics, discipline, intellectualism, and sacrifice. And so as I step down, once again, many thanks to Aunt Mary and the family for sharing Professor Ben Turok with us and the millions of Africans and South Africans. And I thank you all for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. In view of the comments on the digital revolution, let me just recall one incident. My dad was famous for meeting people and giving ideas, seeding ideas. He saw things very simply and clearly. Just less than a year ago, one of Africa's most brilliant AI scientists, a young Senegalese called Mustafa Cissé, who's head of the Google AI Research Center in Ghana, came to Cape Town. And so this brilliant young guy, he's 33 years old, came and I introduced him to my parents. He went to have tea with them. And I called him on his phone after he'd met my dad. And the guy was so excited. Why? The digital revolution is like all technologies. It has a plus and many possible minuses. And bias and abuse are huge dangers. And that's where Mustafa Cissé's research and input has been. And he said it was amazing. My dad asked the right questions. They resonated within half an hour. And he left the tea. He was so excited on his cell phone. Wow, he said, I must say I felt put deep in the shadow. Because I'm a mathematician and so on. My dad was not. But he resonated with brilliant young Africans. They are coming. They will change the world. They will lead the technology, and they will be the ones who have to enforce its proper